Well, hello and welcome to Raj Sabha TV. You're watching discussion today with your host Rajat Kain. In this episode, we'll discuss the performance of Indian economy and how it stands on the indicators as tracked by the Reserve Bank of India. Of the 48 economic indicators tracked by the RBI, 18 remained below pre-COVID levels, while the rest jumped above the February mark, which is a positive development for the economy impacted by lockdown, job losses and dip in consumption if we have to speak about some of the changes in the COVID era. The RBI has said the recovery is better than expected, a view that is even shared and reiterated by the government. So what lies ahead for the Indian economy and what else should we underline for further recovery? To discuss it further, we are joined with a panel of two very important guests, Mr. A.S. Bhal, former Principal Economic Advisor, Govt of India, and Professor Charan Singh. He is CEO of EGROW Foundation. Well, many thanks for joining us. Let me begin with you, Mr. A.S. Bhal. Sir, at the outset, the economic recovery as stated by RBI, given on the indicators that out of 48, 30 have registered a positive growth and they are back to the pre-COVID level. What do you have to say about that, the recovery of Indian economy, if we have to explain to our viewers in a very clean terms?
This is a very positive sign. You know, the RBI tracks about 48 high-frequency indicators, and out of these, about 60% now are above the pre-COVID levels. The level at which these indicators were in February this year, as compared to what they are now, the situation is much improved. It's 60% of the indicators are above the levels what they were in February 2020. So I would say this is a very good sign for the economy. We all are going through very tough times. The whole world is going through tough times.
Right.
And during these tough times, to come up with such statistics, the Indian economy is definitely on the recovery path. And we hope that, of course, it's all contingent on how the COVID things pans out. And we hope that with COVID now being sort of kept under control, the economy will show a much more resilient growth path.
Right. Well, many thanks, Dr. A.S. Bhal, for your opening remarks. Let me go off to Professor Charan Singh here. Professor Charan Singh, many thanks for joining us. Let me understand from you, these are the broad macroeconomic indicators as stated by the RBI. Now, if we have to deconstruct it further, what else perhaps do you see in terms of the positive trajectory of economic growth that can be deciphered from this broad table? I'm again reiterating the macroeconomic indicators.
So first of all, I must say, for good economic growth, you need two things, labor and capital. India has abundance of both. We have good amount of capital and the emerging economy that we are, the state of growth that we are in, the banks play a prominent role in financing growth. And you know, banks are flushed with resources, as you would have seen. And non-food credit in November has already gone ahead, much higher than earlier. So that shows the trend is beginning to look positive and opening up. As far as labor is concerned, we are a young demographic country and COVID had sort of all put us into a lockdown stage in different stages. Yes, first 3 months were a severe lockdown and then we started opening up, and therefore there is no shortage of labor, there is no shortage of capital. Once the green signals are there, the skies are clearer, the COVID is under control, the doctors and the medical facilities are in place, the hygienic conditions required for COVID have already been known to people. It was obvious that production will start bouncing back. And that's exactly what has happened. And as I had predicted earlier and was of the opinion that Indians are waiting to go. They're just waiting to go. And that's exactly what the high frequency indicators are showing. Now, in addition to what I've just observed, what would happen in times of COVID when metros are not running or are running but everybody is cautious, public transport people are scared and worried, what would happen? It is obvious they would prefer a personal vehicle. So you look, the sale of two-wheelers have gone up and we do not have the high frequency indicators of small cars four-wheelers, but small cars. If you look at that indicator, I can promise you even that would have gone up. So agriculture sector, there was never a problem.
Right.
The Rabi and Kharif, they are done well. The Rabi sowing even this year is doing very well, 4% more in terms of area.
Yeah.
So in agriculture, the tractor sales are doing very well. And given this situation that we are in, the e-commerce business is also doing very well. So therefore, as was expected and can be anticipated, where labor and capital is abundance, and they were just stuck because of the lockdown, as the lockdown conditions ease, the growth will start showing up on its own. The last point I want to make in this segment is, this is the busy season. In the busy season, people of my age and vintage would know, earlier the Reserve Bank used to come out with the busy season and the lean season policy.
Okay.
The busy season actually starts from Ganesh Chaturthi. It is the festival season. Everybody is full of enthusiasm. There are celebrations, marriages are taking place. These all push up the demand. So we have already had Ganesh Chaturthi, we have had Diwali, Christmas is on the way, then we'll have Holi, and we'll have other festivals coming up. We have national festival in terms of 26th January coming up.
Right.
So these are the times when the economy tends to look up, people are enthusiastic, weather is very good. I am expecting almost good recovery in the month of November, December, remaining months in the third quarter. And by January, February, March, because of positive news that COVID vaccine is on the way, people are far more confident in taking some risk. Of course, the government is cautious in saying that continue to practice social distance and don't come out unless it's really necessary. But as I look at it, industry is showing up, industrial indicators are showing up. I think there's a good amount of quick recovery, which is going to surprise everyone, as did the quarter 2 recovery surprise everyone. I think quarter 3 and quarter 4 recovery is going to surprise everyone. It'll be very positive.
Right. Professor Charan Singh, that's a very pertinent point you have raised. Let me also just take it forward with Mr. A.S. Bhal. So as Professor talked about, like there is a positivity and perfectly as we are vying towards having a vaccine, and there is now a possibility of having a vaccine in few weeks' time. So will that also be an indicator, I beg your pardon, will that also be a driver for faster economic growth in your view as well?
Certainly. The phenomenon of the vaccine now coming into circulation, hopefully within the next couple of months, will be a very strong positive boost to the economy. It's a very positive signal which will go down in the economy that things are now going back to normal, that you can all come out in the workplace, you can work in those high intensity public interface indicators like even let's say, for example, the hospitality and tourism sector, which has been adversely affected because of the pandemic. Right. So this will, the news, the buzz about the epidemic very soon coming into circulation will present a very, it will be a silver lining in the economy, and it is will provide a big push to the feel-good factor and the factor to come out in the open and do your best, work hard. It will certainly give a big boost to the economy. There's no denying that.
Well, that's right, sir. Professor Charan Singh, you talked about the banking sector, you talked about the economic activities on the anvil. Let's talk about the mutual fund investment. Now, this is one sector, or to say among the indicators, which has not performed that well as would have been expected or was envisaged. Now, what do you think perhaps are the reasons for that? Like, is there some, are people still wary to invest in these bonds and funds?
Yes, mutual fund has been a little lackluster performance, but I'm not too worried about it.
Okay.
Because sometimes financial instruments perform in a varied way. But please remember, the stock market has been absolutely performing too excitedly. Okay. And sometimes I've been very worried that it is going up in a very, very sharp manner. There should be a little conservative in the type of jump that the stock market is taking. And every now and then it touches a new record. So when it comes to financial instruments, investors do show some preference over the other. But if you look at in aggregate, things are good. Why do I say that? Firstly, I've mentioned about the stock market indicator, always touching new and dizzy heights. The deposit growth in the banking system is also doing very, very well. So that means people do have money and they are probably investing in the stock market. Now, this is not only happening in India, it is happening globally. Now, one of the reasons could be that lots of financial support has been given to the households. In Western countries, they have been given ready checks every now and then. And then because there is very less demand, people are staying at home, there is uncertainty. And given that uncertainty, everybody wants to maximize their benefits. And stock market has probably shown them that they could make good amount of profit in a short term. So therefore, I think the stock market has performed relatively much better, promised a higher return and profits vis-a-vis mutual funds. So that is okay. And I don't see it as too much of a negative indicator as far as I'm concerned, because the stock market and the banking system has got a huge amount of resources.
Right, right. Professor, Mr. Bhal, if we read these indicators as listed by the RBI in conjunction with the economic stimulus which central government has been infusing in the market, how do you see that helping in the further tracking of the economy, the further growth trajectory of the economy, or the performance of the economy, to say off?
Yeah, the government's Atmanirbhar package, which was unleashed in three waves.
Right.
You know, it was a very well-conceived plan, and it provided incentives to the MSME sector. It provided incentives to production-linked incentives to about 13 sectors in the economy, and other specific instruments were there. So all these specific incentives which have been provided by the government, which initially thought, some people thought that the government was not giving enough demand push to the economy. But the thinking in the government was to give demand push at a time when there was not enough activity in the economy would not have done good to the economy. But then as the COVID situation improved, the government has gone ahead and provided a demand push to the economy also. The MSME sector has been provided with a lot of credit-linked incentives.
Right.
The production-linked incentives in the mainstream economy have also been given a further boost. And the government is going all out in collaboration with the industry bodies and the other stakeholders to make the ease of doing business improve in the economy. So a lot of intensive groundwork is being done in the economy to improve the ease of doing business. There's some criticism from the private sector often that there are too many regulations we have to follow, and some of them lead to criminalization. So a very serious effort is going on in the economy to improve these compliance mechanism and to remove this criminalization thing, which often sometimes rears its head. So there's a lot of concerted effort in the government, and I would like to reinstate here that there's a very intensive, healthy interaction between the industry bodies, FICCI, CII, ASSOCHAM, and the government. The amount of open interaction is to be seen, to be believed. Industry and government is sort of sitting together and working on unraveling the different kinks in the economy. And I'm sure we're going to come out of it stronger and better. We are going to improve our global value chains. We are going to become more resilient. We will not be dependent on just the neighboring countries for pharmaceuticals or auto car components or electronics. We'll come out of this pandemic much more stronger and much more resilient.
Right. Mr. A.S. Bhal reiterating that we'll come out of the pandemic much more resilient and stronger. Professor Charan Singh, rather a theoretical question here. We have seen the economic stimulus, we have seen the indicators. If we read these indicators, both micro and macro indicators of the economy, so Are we moving towards striking a balance between the demand and supply? Earlier, like what we used to hear was there is perhaps the government is doing enough for the supply side, but perhaps on the demand side it's wanting. So now are we seeing with economic stimulus, with more liquidity, and as Mr. Bhal also pointed out, that economic stimulus has infused confidence for the MSME sectors as well. So.
Look, I have been also hearing all that arguments that you are mentioning, but I have always differed on that. I'll tell you the reason why.
Right.
Firstly, while the government did an excellent job in supporting the complete economic system in the country,
Right, sir.
and also in the, interacting extremely actively, unprecedented, never seen before with the trade bodies also reciprocated. You keep in mind when the Prime Minister, given his charisma, mentioned that please do not remove anybody from the jobs. Unemployment, don't resort to that. It's an investment. Keep the people on the job roll. The Prime Minister, given the economic situation of the country, also ensured that the private sector participates. And in Western world, when people go unemployed, they get paychecks from the government. In our country, they were paid by the private sector.
Right.
Now, when you talk about this very fact, that people continue to get their salaries despite not having to go for work, that was as good as supporting demand.
Absolutely.
Manrega has been extensive. I can tell you, once COVID is over, India's sterling performance in cooperation in public-private partnership, where the government simply said the trade bodies that you will have to support the employment situation, and how the private sector came up and stood by it, I think that's exemplary. It will go in world history. That this is exactly a great model of public-private partnership that happened in our country. So people who kept saying that they're taking care of the supply side, not the demand side, I don't agree with that. Now the other thing is, please remember during the course of pandemic, how much was total lockdown? Banking industry kept on working well.
Yes.
Insurance kept on working well.
Yeah.
Defense forces and police continued to work well. IT industry rather had a great time, that I would call it the golden era. They did not open their offices and all their staff was working from home. Thank God we had already a good network of infrastructure in our country that IT employees could work from anywhere in the country. So to that extent, the demand push continued. And therefore, the government sustained that employment. These things don't happen on its own. If you look at the schemes that the government announced, throughout the pandemic, the government stood behind like a solid rock. Every few weeks, they would come out with a new scheme to say, don't worry, here we are. We will make sacrifices, be it tax rates, be it incentives to MSME, to agriculture sector, to industry. The banks were told, go ahead with the moratorium, be very liberal. So while the government stood behind, the private sector continued to operate, and therefore, to my mind, there was never a situation when demand was not taken care. Do you remember about 6 months back, Prime Minister Garib Kalyan Yojana came. Mudra loans were pushed up. The scheme was introduced, and those small loans of 10,000 rupees given to local hawkers and local bodies were engaged. What was all this? This was all sustaining demand. So therefore, I think the credit should go to the government and the economists and the Indian Economic Service officers like my co-panelist. The credit should go to them. They have been working behind the scenes and coming out with schemes which the government has carried out, and it is for all to see the results. These things don't happen on their own while the world is still reeling and fearing the second lockdown and again a second or third wave. Here is a country which has such a high population, totally democratic, unlike one of our neighbors. We have built the resilience not on its own. When the COVID hit us, neither did we have the hospitals equipped, neither did we have the PPE equipment, neither did we have the oximeters. We had nothing. And within 3 months, the government, the private sector joins hands shoulder to shoulder, and we have facilities now. One of the reasons why people have started coming out of their homes, the industry has started, the festivities are happening, marriages are back into action, is because people have confidence in the medical fraternity here. They know hospitals are there, they know equipment is there, and they also know that the mortality rate in India is amongst the lowest. So I would also, and I'm sorry to say, we don't give credit to all the things that Indians do. but there are indigenous concoctions, you can call it, or remedies that spread, and the public, they also should be given credit that the Indian immune system was strengthened.
Well, that's very well put, Professor Charan Singh, and especially, yeah, sorry, sir, like there was some audio issues, but yes, extremely well explained about how government has worked primarily on both, like especially demand side, as you said. Let me go off to Mr. Bhal here, as we heard Professor Charan Singh really appreciating the work done by the government and officers like you, Mr. Bhal. So. Now, as we go in future, like, I mean, and as you also reiterated that we are in for a solid recovery and that perhaps may surprise all of us, which are the sectors you would underline would register a splendid growth, or are the ones even where the government or the system is banking on to have a growth trajectory taking forward?
Okay, here let me tell you, institutionally, the Department of Industry has selected 24 sectors on which it's focusing. And as you would know, under the production linked incentive also 13 sectors have been chosen. So they start from sectors like auto components, electronics, lithium ion batteries. So they cover the whole spectrum of high technology sectors and labor intensive sectors. So the government has sort of come out in the open, and as we say in cricket, is batting on the front foot. Initially, what used to happen was in the industrial policy was, let us just improve the economic environment, let us just improve ease of doing business. The government would not step out on the front foot and choose the sectors to grow. But now the big change which we have been seeing since this government came to power is that this government is coming out and saying, we will promote these sectors, we'll promote electronics, we'll promote pharmaceuticals, we'll promote auto components, and we'll do it in a particular way. So the government, after a lot of interaction with the industry bodies, have come out with, as I was saying, 13 production-linked incentives, and the Department of Industry is also working on 24 sectors, and these groups are headed by industry bodies. If I remember, it was Mr. Goenka was heading these groups. So it's a fine example, as Professor Wadhwa was saying, of public-private partnership. That's one thing which really stands out for me, as I was also involved in this process, is that very vibrant discussion between the private sector and the public sector on what should be the dynamic comparative advantage of the country, how resilient our global value chain should be. I mean, it's a matter of fact that 70% of international trade takes place through these global value chains. Something is designed somewhere, produced somewhere, and marketed somewhere. So India, as Prime Minister Saab is saying, that we should produce for the world. We should be Atmanirbhar, and Atmanirbhar not in the just after post-independence way. We should be Atmanirbhar on very strong terms. We should engage with the world on our very own strong terms and be a part of the global value chain.
Right. Professor Charan Singh, as we just about to wrap up the show, let me just have a last word from you, sir. Moving towards Atmanirbhar Bharat, the self-reliant India, as has been often underlined by the government and the Prime Minister and the cabinet ministers, which are the initiatives you will rank among the top that will actually lead us towards a self-reliant India?
Actually, we are already becoming self-reliant. You look at the situation that is prevalent during COVID times, and still the recovery has been staged. Exports are not doing very well. Actually, our imports are doing much better. So, of course, I should mention that in some cases, we have been surprised that vehicle exports have taken place. So that is something very good. Okay. Now, where do we need to strengthen ourselves so that we achieve this Atmanirbhar? Firstly, of course, as my co-panelist just mentioned, there are identified areas which the government is pushing, and those need to be established, and then employment is generated. According to me, infrastructure financing and strengthening our rural sector and looking inwards into our economy, the domestic demand, so much of it is sitting there. So once we are able to do this, and the Prime Minister is already on the job, even before COVID, you remember there was this Hawai Chappal to Hawai Jahaz? What are these? These are building the infrastructure spots within the country. And please remember, there are areas which are totally virgin and need to be explored. Northeast needs to be explored, and it's, I think, a great potential of energy and employment within the country. Similarly, we have rich mining areas. They need to be developed. So within the country, there is so much of scope. And even before COVID, the Prime Minister had mentioned that he wants to develop domestic tourism, and where he said at least each one of you go to a few destinations. I think that's another area where we can do a lot. If you look at the high frequency data, foreign tourists have not been coming into India for obvious reasons. We all understand that. But I am thinking within the country, the domestic tourism can expand tremendously. All of us know each state has a great tourist spot within that state. And if we are able to encourage people from within that state to underdo some tourism activity within the state, you will find that the economy again starts coming up tremendously faster than what is originally anticipated by some policymakers. So I'm looking at very positive high growth, and only thing that I'm looking at, we need to start tailor-making policies from for within the country, looking at hinterlands, supporting the rural urban combination, and you will find that we have potential which we are ready to explore and exploit.
Well, thanks Professor Charan Singh, and thanks Mr. A.S. Bhal for discussing this very important issue, threadbare, and also analyzing RBI's indicator of the economy and, of course, the road further ahead for the Indian economy and its recovery, which has now shown signs of a solid recovery. And as Mr. Bhal said, and of course reiterated by Professor Charan, that we are in for a stronger economic recovery as we had expected. So many thanks for watching this edition of Discussion Today. Stay tuned to Rajat TV for more such shows. Thank you. Goodbye.